So, for the record, my name's Angus Armstrong. I'm a member of CED Executive Committee, and I'm organising the Tech Talks this season. Thanks very much for joining us this evening to hear about our work, whether you're with us in person just now or you watch this video, the recording later on. We're very pleased that you've joined us. And whether a CED member or if you're just joining us for the evening, you're very welcome. And I would like to thank everyone who's participating tonight. All of our Tech Talks, as I said, are recorded and available on CED's website and our YouTube channel. And this one should be available sometime over the weekend, for which I have to thank Mike Beresford for his technical skills of the Zambezi mission. This is the last of this season's Tech Talks. I hope you have found them interesting. They certainly have been varied. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of the speakers, of which we've got 4 here just now. So that's great. Tonight's talk is titled Sanitation in the Developing World, and we'll be hearing from Alan Chadborn's experiences. So I'm now going to hand over control to you, Alan.
While Angus is doing that, I should say that I've developed this talk out of personal experiences in Uganda and other countries, mostly Uganda. My experiences are quite limited, really, but I've drawn on various books and publications to widen the information.
Yeah.
Right, here we go. So sanitation is about preventing disease, particularly digestive diseases, diseases of the stomach and bowels. The principles of hygiene are to break the cycle of infection. So we need to look at as many places where infection can get in and break the cycle at each of them. Firstly, in the home, general cleanliness is important, keeping the home clean. If the home has an earth floor, then it will help to smear it with cow dung, hence the picture of the cattle. You add a bit of water to make it a bit softer and smear the whole floor, and that reduces the amount of insect life and seals the dust. If you're upmarket and you've got a cement floor, when that's laid, it's best to make the last with nil. That is a mixture of cement and water without any sand, because that leaves a very smooth finish which is swept and can get all the muck off. Outside, sweeping around the hut, all the compound, to keep it clean and prevent ingress of pests and vermin. Then there's the washing up. Who does the washing up at home? Well, whoever does it, it's good to be able to put the cups and plates and saucers and things onto a shelf. If they're put on the ground, then the chickens and the pigs and the goats will peck at them, lick them, or stand on them and make them dirty again. So it's good to make a shelter. You can see that it's made from local materials. It doesn't need to cost anything. And then hand washing is important, but you can't just turn on the tap. So what can you do? Tier Fund proposed this, which is affordable and homemade. Here's a picture of it. As you can see, it's just got two poles with a fork and a crosspiece and some kind of can slung on there. If it's 5 litres, it'll last longer, and suitable holes made and a connection to the foot pedal. So the person washing their hands doesn't have to touch the can at all. They just operate the pedal water comes out and they've got the soap on a string. Alternatives to that are to have a can or a bottle. There's different ways of doing it. Perhaps you can see from that picture. You can fill it up with a jug. You can have holes in the bottom like that, again with the soap tied on a string so that it's available without having to pick it up. Clear bottles, different ways of doing it. CED has been in the business of providing water in many different places, and CED's water is clean and filtered by Nigel's wonderful filters, of which we've heard in the other tech talks. But no matter how clean the water is coming from the village tap, if your pot is dirty, then infection gets in. So we need to make sure that the pots are kept clean, especially if they're unglazed. I couldn't resist putting in a picture of this man that we saw carrying pots for sale about 20 miles to market every week. That's a wonderful bicycle load. Alternatives for cleaning the water are filters. Griffade were presented to CED at a previous annual meeting. But a less expensive variation is to put water in a clear bottle in the sunshine for a few hours, and the ultraviolet light will deal with a lot of the bugs. You can make a larger filter from a drum. This sketch, the purple is the drum. It may be 100 litres or something like that, or bigger. And then you get a piece of 100 millimetre or 150 millimetre plastic pipe and fill the whole thing with sand. So you can see that the pipe doesn't reach quite to the bottom. There's sand underneath it, sand on the outside and sand on the inside. So that the water, when it comes from this basin above, goes down this way through the pipe, up either side. So it travels through maybe nearly 2 meters of sand, which is quite adequate for filtration, because after a few days, algae will grow and they will grab the bacteria as they go past. If people find that a brass water tap is too expensive, you can get an old bicycle tube and fasten it on there. And when it's put over the top, water is contained. And when it's put down to the container to take it to the house, water flows out. So that's the cheapest way I could think of doing it. I made cement jars out of half a bag of cement was enough to make a 120 litre jar. Now it becomes personal cleanliness. Apart from hand washing, the whole body needs to be washed, especially after you've been working in the garden all morning. But women may have to remain dirty until darkness comes, so they can wash in behind the hut. But if they have a bathing shelter, then they can wash as soon as they finish the morning's work. And if the soil in the shelter is sandy or well drained, then the bathing shelter may be used as for urinating. This is the common practice in northeast Uganda. Now, termites can attack any kind of structure like that, but if you choose wood, trees which strike roots, then the live poles will last for years. And if you plant flowers on them like we've got here, it makes it look quite attractive. Of course, the poles are covered with grass, but the grass must not touch the ground, otherwise the termites will get up and eat the lot. So it's important to tie the cross pieces and the grass so that only the live poles are in contact with the ground. Now, all of this stuff doesn't come by reading the newspaper, so it may be that training is good. We had teams going out to the villages, and 2 parish volunteers were elected from each village, and we had training sessions. Training sessions are also held when CED does a water installation, so that people are all together on the same thing. Or it may be that there's literacy training, and the subject of the literacy training may be words like water or disease, and that will come into the reading and writing, but the training about fighting disease by sanitation can be involved in that. Now, we found that people spruce up their homes when they hear that a visitor is coming. I don't know if you do the same. So, oh, somebody's coming, we better sweep up the house. So we found that visitors really helped. Here's part of the training going on with the leaders learning to do their training. And here's the parish volunteers going out on their bicycles to reach the villages. So training is good. And if you can organize visitors to follow it up, go around the homes, either by a plan or by surprise, then that keeps people on their toes. Now we come to the subject of toilets. Lots of different sorts of toilets, of which the long drop or the pit latrine is the most common. That uses anaerobic decomposition, which produces some smells, but it works and people understand it. It should be 15 meters downhill from any water source, because you don't want contamination to go from the latrine into the well. So essentially it needs a building for privacy with a door, and they should aim for digging 5 meters deep. That's quite a long way down.
Well, yeah, it is.
Now, there's something called the Ventilated Improved Pit Latrine, which was developed by Morgan in Zimbabwe. And this is made with a spiral wall and doesn't need a door. However, if animals are a problem, it may be good to have at least a half door. Essential part of it is that it has a vent stack pipe. And that stack pipe has a gauze cover so that the flies die. Full details are there from Loughborough University. And here's a picture. So here's the hut for privacy. And here's the pit. The flies may come in with the air and they may hatch in here, but they always go for the light. So the light is at the top of the vent stack, and when they get there, there's a gauze and they can't get out. So they buzz around there till they run out of energy and then they fall down and die. So that deals with the flies, but it also ventilates the house so that the smells go up the vent pipe. there's a picture with the spiral. And here's the foundation for making it. The advantage of pit latrines is that they're well understood, very common all over third world countries. They need little maintenance if they're deep enough. And but the disadvantage is if there's a high water table, the dung floats. And I can tell you from experience that when you squat there and you see the dung floating about a foot below where you're squatting, it doesn't feel very comfortable. If there's underlying rock, you can't dig deep enough. If it's very sandy soil, it may collapse on the person digging it. There was a case where the police had got a prisoner to dig a pit latrine, and in the process it collapsed and they couldn't dig fast enough to save him. So it needs shoring up with boards or being lined with bricks or blocks, which of course makes it more expensive. If there's a well nearby, as we've said, we need to make sure that it's downstream, downhill. Now, if there's too many people using the pit latrine and it's filling up too fast, more than the rate of decomposition, then you may need a vacuum tanker to empty it, and that's expensive. And as with any anaerobic decomposition, there's an offensive smell. If it's difficult to dig deep enough, then a short drop pit latrine may be a good idea. In that case, there's two pits, and when the first one is full, you move the hut over to the second one, and meanwhile this is decomposing or drying, and it may be dug out, or it may be that will be sufficient and you can just put the hut back onto the other one, or you can dig it out and put it on the compost heap. Pour flush is another idea for eliminating flies, because the water trap, as with any normal flushing latrine or toilet, the water trap prevents any smells or flies coming up. Now, this obviously, there's more water going down than just urine, so there has to be a good seepage rate so that it doesn't fill up. So that depends on the underlying soil and subsoil. On the other hand, there's composting toilets, which depend on aerobic decomposition. And the main thing here is not to drown them. They don't like it, and they'll give over to the smelly anaerobic ones. So in order to reduce moisture going into your composting latrine, I'm afraid this is just a picture. Imagine that's the squatting hole. If there's any spillage, any spillage on the floor, get some ash from the cooking fire and sweep the ash and the urine or whatever the other dung in and into the pit. No water. To help the bacteria, add kitchen waste, potato peelings, outside cabbage leaves, that sort of thing. Also add a bundle of grass every week, and that will fuel the bacteria. They'll work harder, get hotter, and that will eliminate the pathogens. Again, to reduce moisture, you have a gutter. So this is a cross section of the slab. Here's the squatting hole. The person is standing facing that way. The urine goes into the gutter and the feces go straight down. The gutter communicates with leads to a can, maybe a jerry can. And when that begins to fill up, you pour it into a garden compost heap. And the ammonium compounds, the nitrogen from there, will feed the bacteria and help the decomposition in the compost pit and eventually produce better crops. One form of composting latrine is the alternate fixed pit. Fancy name there, Fossa Alterna. So you've got one pit here, and when that's full up, maybe after a year, you transfer the hut over to the other one and use that one. At the end of the second year, you can dig out this compost, which will have rotted down beautifully by then, and you put it on the garden. Here's my example of this. I read a book called Sanitation Without Water and developed my design from there. So here's the two pits, covers on each pit. The pits are about 30 centimeters below ground level. That's all. It's got a reinforced cement floor and it's got two squatting holes. So you first year with this one, put a block in that one and use the second for a year. At the end of the second year, empty the first one with a wheelbarrow. I used to get about 9 wheelbarrows full out every year. Mind you, we had a good number of visitors who all contribute. I was experimenting with making donkey carts and ox carts out of local branches without buying or making sawn timber. But that's by the by. When we came to make the second version of this Fossa Alterna, instead of buying reinforcing bar, which I felt villagers would find difficult, we made parabolic arches. As you can see, the regular size of block was really too big. It was a bit clumsy. So after that, we made them with smaller blocks, and that worked better. So the parabolic arch is strong enough by itself to support the floor, and then you build your hut on top of that. Here's the back of a hut, and the vent pipe is made by using locally grown withies and then covering them with mud. And that dries hard, and you've got a good pipe without having to buy plastic pipe. Here's the other side of it, a light wooden door, steps up, and here you can see that the covers on the two pits. The alternate fixed pit that we've just looked at works very well, but some people may be reluctant to handle what they consider is still human waste. In actual fact, I found only eggshells and mango stones survived. All the rest was completely rotted and just looked like friable soil. But it's a cultural thing, so we may need an alternative. And the Arbaloo, again, developed by Morgan in Zimbabwe. This one, the compost stays in the pit. The hut, the shelter is very light and is attached to the slab. So the pit fills up and when it's filled up, you move the whole thing to the next place. So here's a picture to illustrate that. Here's the pit filling up. There's a new pit provided. Again, each pit has a ring beam round it made of bricks, and the slab is put on top of that. When the slab is made, it's made with holes with straps or bits of rope as handles, so that 4 people can lift the whole thing in one go and put it on the new place. After moving the hut and allowing the compost to finish its decomposition and cool down, then you can plant a tree. And the tree will say, "Thank you very much, I've got food for life." And that's a wonderful solution if you've got enough land. So your hands are clean, you get healthy, productive trees, but you need enough land for an orchard. And your orchard can be bananas or fruit trees or trees for firewood. But when it comes to large institutions, schools or prisons, a composting toilet of the type we've just been looking at is not really good enough, because the volume would overwhelm and management would be a challenge. Who would look after it? Who would sweep it? Who would put in the kitchen waste and so forth? So in some countries, toilets are connected to biogas digesters, and that's a wonderful solution. It's called Gobar gas in India. And they've built 1.2 million. So there's plenty of examples, and I expect people could look them up on the websites. Also in Zambia, Kenya, Ethiopia. So that's obviously a working solution. Another solution is been developed by Joseph Jenkins of USA, and he calls it humanure. So inside the hut, there's a seat and a reasonably large container in which to do your business. And there's a box with sawdust or chopped grass, chaff, which everybody is asked to put on top as soon as they've finished. And then there's a monitor, somebody appointed who's agreed to do the job of taking out the bucket and emptying it into the compost heap on a daily basis. And the compost heap is first of all lined with grass. The compost is tipped in the middle, and add as much kitchen waste, any other kind of waste that which will rot down. The more the merrier, because the bacteria will heat up, and the whole thing the heat will destroy the pathogens. So it's for institutions. Monitors need to be appointed. It needs a large throughput, and the rapid temperature rise kills the pathogens. Low on capital, and it gives compost for the gardens, but you have to have people who agree to do the job. Of course, there's manufactured versions of composting toilets made out of varieties of plastic, and you can look them up on the web and buy them if you can afford them. Now, all of the latrines we've been talking about so far need floor slabs. The pit latrines need concrete slabs, and CED has been involved in training local women to make them. Generally women, and they can make a business out of it, selling slabs to their neighbours. So that's good for them. Here's an idea for producing the slabs for the arbaloo. It's a circular slab, and it's better if it's thicker in the middle. So that you have a metal band, a piece of flat metal formed into a circle and welded, and then you provide two scrapers. If possible, have a post up the middle, and the scraper has a hole in the middle so that you can revolve it round to scrape the sand on the floor exactly level. And then you pour your cement, you put your wooden plug in the shape of the squatting hole in the middle. You also put some pegs at places on the outside which will form holes. Come to that in a minute. And as you pour your cement and spread it out, you put in some wire as reinforcing. It only needs it on the outside, near the circumference, I should say. And then once that's done, use the second scraper. It has made with a bevel, so that the thicker, the slab is thicker in the center where people's weight is going to be. Once that's dried a bit, once the cement has dried a bit, you can, towards the afternoon, you can put on some wet sand to reduce the rate of drying. And that wet sand will be there to put the next one on the next day. So each day of the week you build up, you raise the circular band and make another one on top of that each day until you've got 5 or 6. And then on the Monday morning, you can take it all to pieces and you have a pile of slabs. And all of them will have been kept damp so that the cement can cure without drying. If you do have a flush toilet, then, flush toilets are common in cities, but need a water supply, obviously. However, water supply isn't the only thing. They'll also need repairs. Who's going to do that? And they need a way of disposing of all the soil water. If there isn't a public sewer, then a septic tank is needed. This has 2 chambers and the effluent is dispersed through perforated pipes. Here's a diagram of that. So the connection from the toilets is here. Material comes in here, it's deposited here, and it decomposes in this first chamber. And as more liquid comes in, so it overflows to the second chamber. And here further decomposition takes place until it can flow out. By this time, it's relatively clean, and it can go out to pipes which are laid in the soil, which are perforated, or if they're clay pipes, the liquid can disperse through the joints. So those would be laid out in a fan, perhaps across the land. That's quite an expensive bit of kit, but that's what's needed for flush toilets. So in summary, we can see that sanitation is not high tech, but it is a matter of changing habits. Habits are quite difficult to change, and it's best if the whole community does it together. So as we find in Africa, churches are very popular. People go to church, and if the church can be the agent of change, then the whole community will change together. So if the information can go to the leaders of the different churches in the village and teach all the congregations, then everybody can change together, and that's what we now do. Deuteronomy chapter 23, verses 12 to 14, goes back thousands of years, but there's the basis of breaking the cycle of infection. People were asked to go outside the camp with something like a trowel so that they could bury their feces. It's a good start from a long time ago. So we've looked at different ways in which this can be done. And here's some references. I mentioned sanitation without water. There's also Robert Chambers' book here, Community-Led Total Sanitation from Sussex University. Footsteps has lots of good ideas, and that's the magazine from Tear Fund. And then DFID and WEDEC, a catalogue of low-cost toilet options. Most of these are already on CED's website. The VIP latrines from Loughborough University, toilets that make compost, from which I took several of the diagrams that you've been looking at. So thanks to Peter Morgan and Practical Action Publishing. I did incidentally get permission from Practical Action for putting these, putting their pictures on this screen for the world to see. And then the Humanure Handbook by Joseph Jenkins is published by himself. There, it's just a bit less than 3/4 of an hour, which should leave plenty of time for questions. Thank you all for listening.
Okay, Alan. So if you stop screen sharing.
Yeah, see if I can get to that.
Well, Alan, thank you very much for that run through your research, your reading, and your experiences. We'll sort of open the floor to any questions folks might have. I will. I've got to unmute you to do that, haven't I? No. Can folks unmute themselves? I think you should be able to. Yep. So if you want to ask a question, just unmute yourself, and we can have an open forum. So Alan, I don't really know what have you done? What have you been doing overseas? You're obviously playing with donkey carts and building crappers, but is that what you were doing overseas?
Well, the reason we went to Uganda in '93 was that there had been what they called insurgency in northeast Uganda. The history behind it was that the Karamojong tribe next door had got guns from the barracks when Idi Amin fell, and they raided cattle from the Teso. The Teso had been disarmed by Museveni, as had the rest of the country, whereas they couldn't manage to get the guns from the Karamojong. So the Karamojong raided, the Teso were unarmed, and they lost most of their cattle. However, a few Teso managed to get guns and tried to defend themselves. When the army heard of that, they thought it was an insurrection. So the army, as well as the Karamojong, were against the Teso. And they were herded into large villages called camps. And anybody found in the open countryside was assumed to be a rebel and either shot or taken into prison. Eventually, missionaries talked with the bishops, and the bishops talked with Museveni, and they realized that the whole thing was a mistake, and amnesty was granted and the thing cooled down. But it needed people to get, having been in camps for many years, they needed to get back to their own homes and start living life again, instead of living hand to mouth from day to day. So there were two jobs to do. One was to get people to live in a sanitary way to reduce infection. And the other was to enable mothers to feed their weaned children with nutritious food, because the tradition had been to feed them with milk from their cattle. They had no cattle, and so it needed alternatives. So we tried to introduce soybeans and a whole variety of local natural plants, which you might call weeds, for vitamins and proteins. So we were teaching people in the villages for about 7 years by the means of those ladies you saw in the picture.
Oh, okay. So what was your background? You that sounds like agricultural. I suppose there's a mix of agriculture and.
Yeah, well, I trained as an agricultural engineer initially.
Okay, yeah.
And I guess my preference is for the engineering. So my job was maintaining the bicycles.
Okay.
Which my father had taught me when I was even at primary school, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But also, we were trying to alleviate the problems. We did a sort of survey when we first got there. We were taking around various churches all around the villages. What did people need? And one of the most important things people said was ways of grinding their grain, because they had big block stones and saddle stones, and the woman knelt in front of the saddle stone for half an hour every morning to grind grain for their family, and they got backache and they wanted other means. So I was trying to find means of home grinding. The hand-turned maize mills, which you could buy, the grain was too small. It just ran through the grooves. So I was working with a manufacturer of the saddle stones, and together we produced a quern. So the first thing to do to be able to carve this granite into a circular quern was to forge chisels strong enough out of car springs and harden them so that it would cut the grooves of the granite. So it was a process, but we just about got there. In fact, we got a pedal-powered one going, and I came back from leave to found that the pedal-powered grinding mill had broken down, but somebody had installed a diesel-powered one. And apparently the women were happy to do weeding for other people as hired labourers in order to earn enough money to pay for the grinding by the diesel-powered grinder.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the end of something like a 4-year project. But you can never tell what people are willing to do and not willing to do.
Mm. Any
other question?
I asked a question about cultural aspects of handling human feces. You mentioned, Alan, thanks for your talk. Sorry I came late. Very interesting. When I was working in Kenya, particularly the tribes in Western Kenya, they wouldn't handle human feces. So any attempt to promote something in which they would then have to handle human feces was just a non-starter, because of cultural. So how did that pan out in some of the technologies you've been showing us, and how did you overcome some of the cultural challenges?
Well, as far as I know, nobody copied me. People didn't take it up. There had lots of visitors. I think the Arbaloo is a really good idea. And I made one of those so that people could experience that. But I'm not aware of any take up.
Mhm.
But we couldn't even get people to dig pit latrines. It was men's work to dig latrines. They were reluctant to do it. We could convert the women to good sanitation, but the men didn't cooperate very much. Well, no, a bit, I guess, but the same with digging a new well. They're reluctant to do it. It's women's job to fetch the water, so why should we men dig a well just to save them a bit of walking?
And so despite your efforts, people were just, what, open defecation?
I think I didn't. Yes, I think that's right. Yeah, going out to the bush.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When I was working within a Turkana community, the men didn't defecate. I mean, that sounds strange, doesn't it? Of course they did, but what would happen is they would just wander off and do whatever they would defecate somewhere. But the idea was that men didn't defecate, so no one saw what they did.
Yeah.
And that's fine until the rain came and washed the feces into the water courses, and then people started obvious sanitation problems. So introducing latrines into that culture, quite difficult.
Yeah. Yes, we visited a Karamojong Manyata, which in theory was supposed to be a movable village, and the whole surroundings when you walked out was contaminated. Awful.
I don't know. There's one thing I wasn't quite understanding about the Arbaloo. You were talking about how you made multiple slabs at one time. Is that right?
I didn't actually get round to it. I saw them being produced in Nairobi, so most of that idea is from Nairobi.
I was wondering, how do you form the hole in the center if you're doing one on top of the other like that?
The wooden plug.
Yeah. You just make the hole before you do the next, or do you make the hole?
Put the wooden mold in, and then pour the cement.
Yeah.
And I suppose if you've just got one wooden mold, you would take it out late in the day, by which time the cement has become somewhat solid.
Yeah.
And so that you can, and then fill it with sand, with the wet sand. And then the next day you can use the plug again.
Right, so you wouldn't necessarily have to have lots of different wooden molds. You could maybe.
I didn't go back to the wooden plugs. I'm not sure if you've got that. That the plugs are placed a pair at each 90 degrees. So there's 4 pairs around the circumference.
These were the little pins.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so again, you take them out. You can have lots of plugs because that's easy to get, circular and cylindrical, just bits of stick really, aren't they? Yeah. So when the cement is set completely, you can push the plug out and you've got a hole. And that hole is used to anchor the privacy structure, and it's used for a rope to make a handle, and then those handles can be used to lift the slab once when it needs transferring.
Right. Okay.
Thanks for raising that,
Alan. I've noted at the beginning you said your experience was quite limited. Believe me, it is not. I've known you long enough to know that you're a mine of information.
Well, I meant limited in terms of sanitation.
Well, I don't know. The other thing I wanted to mention was that very often I've been in places where the sanitation is serving an institution, and you mentioned that yourself. And the classic thing is that at a certain time of day, the bell rings, all the pupils come out of their classes. They all want to use the toilet, and they've all got to rush back in. This is a very, very high peaking in the usage of whatever sanitation is there. And I don't think many schools have really solved that. But it's something to bear in mind that the number of toilets needed is always much greater in an institutionalized setting than it is in an informal setting.
Yeah.
The other thing that has worried me a lot is that the elderly and especially disabled people will move more slowly. And I've seen sad cases where disabled children just never can get there in time. And even in a household toilet, most of the designs you see in the textbooks you've mentioned and in real life don't really take account of the disabled user, nor do they often take account of the very young user, the child who really ought to be accompanied, but very often isn't. And there are many sad cases of children being found in toilets, amongst all the crud, and they've died there. It's not at all uncommon. So as we work on toilets within CED, I think it's helpful to bear in mind that not all the people who want to use the toilet are able to get themselves in there, stand in the correct place, sit in the correct place, squat in the correct place, whatever, and do the right things and walk out again. I just mentioned that because it's something that's troubled me a lot.
Well, I'm glad that's recorded and people will hear your remarks, Dick. That sounds very wise.
Could you put in any sort of safety bars or anything to prevent falls? Would that be practical?
Well, if it's a good slab and the squatting hole is limited in size, I wouldn't have thought a child would have gone through. What about that, Dick?
Well, history shows that many children have fallen through. You only have to read an average African newspaper for 3 or 4 weeks and you'll come across cases.
A lot of the, well, I can't, my only experience of, real experience of this is in Madagascar. And in Madagascar, it's quite rare to come across a cement or a concrete sand plat or squat plate. It's usually timber.
Yeah.
And not very clean because it's difficult to keep the timber clean, obviously. But what happens is the timber rots. And there were quite a few times I was using one myself and I was thinking, for goodness sake, this is about to, you could feel the whole thing creaking under your weight. And it's very easy to imagine that, what Dick's saying, it's very easy to imagine that happening in that sort of setting, for sure. Yeah.
Yes, I thought this was just a problem of the third world. But I visited Ukraine about 3 years ago, and they had exactly the same deep pits, pit latrines behind each house. Very full. Quite uncomfortable experience for people from England to experience. They didn't want to go and squat there.
Did they have concrete squat plates there, Alan?
No, timber.
Timber, was it? Right.
Just like you say. I thought there was money to be made there if somebody could just make a mobile vacuum suction device and offer to clear out people's pits for a minimum amount of money, compost it, and then sell them the compost to gardeners. The benefits for both sides.
There are
money to be made.
There are obviously the lorries with suction hoses on them that are used to empty cesspits in this country.
Yeah.
Whether you could do that in somewhere like Ukraine with those pits, I don't know.
It probably depends on what else people put down. we've got a septic tank. This is the first time I've lived somewhere with a septic tank, but of course you put cleaning products down, and so there are chemicals adding into the system.
Yes. If you put cleaning products down, they, especially biological ones, they may inhibit the decomposition.
Presumably that's not a problem in the developing world because people aren't using that kind of stuff.
It's not a problem with a pit latrine, is it? Anywhere, because the products wouldn't go down. It wouldn't be.
They just wouldn't have them. Is that what you're saying?
I don't know what they do with their washing water.
Yeah.
It's not going down the same. It's not like a system in your home where all the soil, the grey water is going into the same place, is it?
I share an observation. Thank you so much, Alan, for all of your wonderful illustrations. There's some and loads of testimony there as well. It was really good to see the tippy tap being demonstrated there. Just a little testimony from our side here in Tanzania, where about 5 years ago, when we first arrived, we were doing interventions in the villages with churches, very much like you were talking about there, and teaching people about basic sanitation. For example, tippy taps, and training people to use them, and nobody took them up. But then it takes a crisis. So when COVID happened, suddenly, when we revisited 3 years later, everyone had tippy taps.
Wow.
And I don't know what was the catalyst there. Maybe the government had also then followed up with, teaching how to, how do we get sanitation into these very rural areas to keep people safe. And I like to think that, we have played a little part of, just planting that seed. And I think very much like what you were saying, maybe people will take it up, maybe people will not, these crazy foreign engineers coming in and showing us how to do these weird, wonderful things with concrete. Yeah. I'm never going to take that up until there's a crisis or until there's a need. And I think that's it's a really useful thing to take away. Yeah, I think your talks also made me think of a few other things. There's the collapsing pits. There's this thing called vetiver grass, which has roots which go 4 meters deep, apparently. Which, if you plant them in a circle, let the roots form, and then dig the circle out, then you have a stabilized pit.
Oh, that's a good idea.
I've never seen it done in person, but I've read about it, and I've got some growing in my garden, so I'm going to try.
What, sorry, Simon, what did you call the grass?
Is it vetiver grass?
Vetiver, I think.
Yeah, I can share it once once the YouTube goes. I can put it in the comments.
Okay.
That would be great. Yeah.
And
there's another one.
Planning ahead, though.
Yes, exactly. Planning ahead. And then another project which CED has been involved in funding here in Tanzania is installing SATO toilets, SATO, which is a self-closing plastic sink, which you build into the slab very much like the wooden cork, but the plastic sink remains there, and it's got a counterweight on it. It's fantastic, and we've through funding through CED and other partners, we've been able to distribute something like I'm trying to think of now, about 300 of those on some of the local islands, and they've been really accepted very much because they can retrofit them to the wooden slabs and even concrete slabs, and it encourages people to build new toilets. So, I think you're testifying from 30 years ago. Innovation is coming slowly, but I think still people are at this basic level of wanting a solution which they can afford, and concrete, wood is there. It's but now these new little plastic things are coming and helping, which is, I think, is great. It's great to see that as part of this story that you've told today. So thank you.
Thank you, Simon.
I was just going to say, following on from the tippy tap idea, I've come across the idea of for tap stands trying to reduce the spread of contamination via hand touching of the tap itself amongst the community, because everybody's handling the tap, so that contamination can pass across. To have actually foot operated taps. So you just put your container and press a pedal, and that would allow the flow to come to into your container and prevent that contamination. It's just another idea, really.
Yes, good idea. Are those manufactured, Nigel?
I have seen them, yeah, manufacture of them, but I've not seen them really for developing countries. So they would be more, in a more modern sort of setting in the developed world, probably. But I don't see any particular reason why they couldn't be made in developing countries as well. There may be a simpler way of doing it that could be adapted, but yeah, I've not seen them distributed or used. It really came in through the COVID thoughts, really, to try to prevent COVID being passed from person to person, but it would also prevent other contamination as well.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, there were some very brilliant contraptions designed by local workmen here, the Fundis, welding up all sorts of contraptions to turn to, so, you know, the one evolution of the hand washing is a bucket with a small plastic tap on it, or a metal tap, and yeah, in bus stands and all sorts of places they have figured out how to use a foot pedal to switch that tap on, to turn it on and turn it off, and it's fantastic.
Oh.
It's really good to see, and they're, you know, across the country now here in Tanzania. So
Wonderful.
yeah,
That's very encouraging. Yeah.
Okay, well, if we're sort of drawing up with questions, if anybody else has got any other questions, then just speak up. But Alan, I'd just like to thank you for sharing all your thoughts and findings. I think everyone's found that very interesting, and I love the idea that this is we record this, and this is a resource that's going to sit there going forward. And hopefully people will draw on that. I know one of our recorded talks from last year, I know it's been viewed something like 1,500 times. So it just shows that the right kind of information being available to people can be really, really helpful. So thank you again, Alan, and thank you everybody for joining us this evening. This is the last of our tech talks for this year. We will be kicking off again later in the year, probably around about October, and we've got a number of ideas already going forward. But if anybody wants to put forward another idea for a tech talk, that would be great. And come near the time, I will circulate emails so that you know this is coming up as a reminder, and hopefully see everybody again in the autumn. If anybody here has not had an email from me to tell you that today was happening, if you were able to get in touch with me, if you haven't got my email address, if you send one to CED, it'll get passed down the line, and I'll add you on to the circulating list, the email circulating list, so you know that this is coming up. Okay, thank you again.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alan.
I feel privileged. I feel privileged to have been able to present something.
Well, there you are.
And you're all welcome to City Hope Church in Bermondsey on the 25th of September, 25th of June, where we have proper flush toilets.
Hey.
And why would we come there, Alan? For those who don't know,
The AGM annual day.
the CED AGM. It's usually a great get together, a very enjoyable day. Okay, long trip for you, Simon.
Yes.
yes, indeed.
Yeah, we'll let you off.
Okay, good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you, everyone.
Right.